What if I told you the greatest danger to your soul is not your flaws, not your mistakes, not even your so-called sins, but your obsession with appearing good? Think about that for a moment. How much of your life has been built not on truth, but on image? How often do you silence your real thoughts, hide your raw emotions, or act in ways that please others just to maintain the illusion of being good? Carl Jung warned us that this obsession with goodness is not only dishonest, it's destructive. And if you don't face it, you may never discover who you truly are, but here's the part nobody talks about. The more you strive to look good in the eyes of others, the more you cut yourself off from your own soul. Because goodness, when performed for validation, becomes just another mask. And masks, Jung said, are the prison walls of the psyche. So let's dive into the dark psychology of human nature and why. Jung insisted that you must stop trying to appear good if you want to live authentically. Now, here's the shocking truth. Every one of us has a shadow. It's the part of ourselves we'd rather not see, the impulses and desires we deny, the flaws we suppress, the anger we pretend we don't feel. When we try too hard to be good, what we're really doing is pushing all of that shadow deeper into the dark. We don't erase it. We just hide it. And when you hide something powerful, it doesn't disappear. It grows. Wait until you hear this. Some of the kindest people you'll ever meet are also carrying the darkest shadows. The preacher who rails against sin by day may secretly indulge in the very acts he condemns by night. The friend who always smiles, who never says a negative word, may explode one day with rage you never saw coming. Why? Because no one can suppress the shadow forever. Here's where Jung's insight becomes dangerous. The more you appear good on the outside, the more dangerous your shadow becomes on the inside. Think about a pressure cooker. The lid is clamped down tight, steam building inside. At first, it looks calm, controlled. But if the steam isn't released, it will eventually explode with far greater force. That's the human psyche when we try to live as pure, flawless beings. And let me ask you something. Have you ever felt exhausted from trying to look good? Exhausted from always saying the right thing, doing the right thing, showing the right face to the world? That exhaustion isn't weakness, it's the weight of the mask. It's your soul suffocating under the image of perfection. But here's the part nobody talks about. Jung said that true wholeness is not about being good, it's about being real. It's about integrating your shadow, not denying it. That means acknowledging the envy you feel, the selfishness you hide, the anger you suppress, and seeing that they're part of you. They don't make you evil. They make you human. Let me give you a story. A young man grew up in a religious household where goodness was everything. He learned to be polite, humble, and obedient. He was praised for being the good son, but deep inside, he carried rage at being silenced, rage at being unseen, rage at never being allowed to express his true self. He buried that anger so deep that even he denied it. Years later, as an adult, the rage erupted in self-destructive ways, addictions, broken relationships, bursts of violence. Why? Because his shadow, denied for too long, took control of him. Jung would say his obsession with appearing good actually made him more vulnerable to the darkness. Here's the part that will shock you. The people who terrify us the most are not those who openly admit their flaws. It's the ones who appear flawless. Because their shadow has gone underground, and what's buried underground always resurfaces, but in distorted, unpredictable, and often destructive ways. So Jung's warning is clear. If you want to live authentically, stop trying to appear good. Stop trying to perform purity. Stop trying to polish your image at the expense of your soul. Instead, dare to confront your shadow. But wait, let's go deeper. Why are we so obsessed with appearing good in the first place? Why do we care so much about what others think of us? Jung would say it's because of the persona, the mask we create to function in society. The persona is necessary. You can't go around blurting out your every thought or impulse. But when you confuse the persona with your true self, when you believe you are the mask, you lose touch with who you really are. Here's the dark truth. Society doesn't actually want you to be good. It wants you to be manageable. It wants you to conform, to fit into boxes, to perform roles that keep the system running smoothly. Your obsession with being good is really just a way of making yourself less threatening. But your soul is not here to be manageable. Your soul is here to be whole. Think of it like a garden. If you only water the flowers and neglect the weeds don't die. They grow stronger in secret, tangling their roots beneath the soil until one day they choke out the flowers. Your shadow is the weeds. If you ignore it, it won't vanish. It will overtake you. So let me challenge you. Stop asking, how can I appear good? And start asking, how can I be whole? Stop asking, what will people think of me? And start asking, what do I truly think of myself? Because here's the paradox Jung revealed. The moment you stop trying to appear good is the moment you begin to become good, not in the shallow, performative sense, but in the authentic sense. A person who integrates their shadow is less likely to project it onto others, less likely to manipulate or deceive, less likely to harm unconsciously. They become grounded, real, trustworthy. This next truth will shock you. The truly dangerous people in the world are not those who know their darkness. It's those who deny it. History has proven this again and again. The leaders who preach morality while hiding corruption, the systems that demand obedience while secretly exploiting, all of it comes from the obsession with appearing good while denying the shadow. So the question is, are you willing to stop performing? Are you willing to take off the mask, even if it means being misunderstood? Even if it means people see your flaws? Because only then will you step into the radical honesty of living as your whole self. Let's go deeper into the root of the problem. Why does society condition us to obsess over appearing good in the first place? Why do so many of us spend our lives polishing masks rather than facing our truth? The answer, Jung would say, is woven into culture, religion, and family structures. From childhood, we're rewarded for obedience and punished for authenticity. And that's where the fracture begins. Think back to when you were a child. How many times did you hear, be a good boy or be a good girl? Those words sound harmless, but they're not. They don't teach you to be true. They teach you to conform. They teach you that love, attention, and acceptance are conditional, that you must earn them by performing goodness. And little by little, the child learns that their worth depends on wearing a mask, but here's the part nobody talks about. The child who learns to please others becomes the adult who doesn't know who they are. They can smile, nod, and say all the right things, but deep inside they feel hollow. They may have careers, families, and friends, but they still ask themselves late at night, do they love me or do they love the mask I wear? This next truth will shock you. Society doesn't care if you're authentic. It cares if you're predictable. It wants you to play your role, the polite worker, the obedient student, the agreeable partner. And as long as you play along, you're rewarded. But the moment you show your shadow, your anger, your rebellion, your raw desires, suddenly you're dangerous. That's why so many people bury their true selves. Jung called this repression. And repression always has a cost. The cost is that your soul is split in two. On one side, the persona, the smiling, polished self you show the world. On the other side, the shadow, the raw, messy, untamed parts of you that you keep hidden. And the longer this split continues, the deeper your suffering becomes. But wait until you hear this. The obsession with appearing good creates not only inner suffering, but collective hypocrisy. Think of history's greatest atrocities. They were rarely committed by people who admitted they were doing evil. No, they were done by people who convinced themselves they were doing good. Wars fought in the name of justice. Persecutions carried out in the name of purity. Oppression justified in the name of morality. The shadow doesn't vanish just because you declare yourself righteous. It hides behind a banner of goodness and does its work from there. Here's where the story gets personal. Imagine a young woman raised in a strict family where she was praised for being kind, gentle, and selfless. She learned early on that saying no made her selfish, that expressing anger made her ungrateful, that wanting something for herself was wrong. So she learned to smile, to serve, to always put others first. She became the perfect daughter, the perfect friend, the perfect employee. But deep down, she was drowning. Her needs, her desires, her passions, all buried under the heavy weight of goodness. By 30, she was burned out, anxious, resentful, and secretly furious. This is what Jung meant when he said that repression doesn't make us pure. It makes us divided. The young woman's anger didn't disappear. It transformed into passive aggression, into bitterness, into silent despair. By refusing to face her shadow, she became a prisoner of her own goodness. But here's the part nobody talks about. Society rewards this imprisonment. People love the ones who sacrifice themselves, who suppress their truth, who always appear selfless. But that love is conditional. It's built on a lie. Because the moment she refuses to play along, the love is withdrawn. That's how society traps us. It convinces us that being good is the only way to be loved. And now let's go even deeper. Jung said the shadow isn't just personal, it's collective. That means entire cultures can fall into the same trap of pretending to be good while hiding their darkness. Think of the neighborly smiles in a small town where gossip and judgment thrive beneath the surface. Think of corporations that present themselves as socially responsible while exploiting workers behind the scenes. Think of religious leaders who preach morality while secretly violating their own vows. Wait until you hear this. The shadow that is denied on an individual level is the same shadow that erupts on a collective level. When a society tries too hard to appear pure, corruption festers beneath the surface. When a family obsesses over reputation, secrets and abuse go unspoken. When an individual tries to be perfect, addictions and breakdowns eventually follow. So let me ask you, are you beginning to see how dangerous this obsession with appearing good really is? It's not just exhausting, it's soul-destroying. It severs you from your authenticity and feeds the very darkness you're trying to hide. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to appear good, people may accuse you of being bad. They may call you selfish, rebellious, arrogant, or even sinful. But in reality, you're finally becoming whole. You're finally breaking free from the prison of image. And yes, it will be uncomfortable at first. Because when you take off the mask, the world sees your flaws. But for the first time, the world also sees you. Here's the part nobody talks about. When you embrace your shadow, you don't become less moral. You actually become more grounded, more compassionate, more authentic. Why? Because you're no longer projecting your denied flaws onto others. You're no longer judging them for things you can't face in yourself. Instead, you can say, yes, I know envy. I know anger. I know selfishness. And I also know love, kindness, and generosity. That's real humanity, not perfection. But wholeness? And this leads us to Jung's warning. If you refuse to face your shadow will face you. It will appear in the people you attract, the patterns you repeat, the relationships you sabotage. Life will keep mirroring your shadow back to you until you have no choice but to acknowledge it. Think of it like this. You can put on the mask of goodness and fool the world. But you can never fool your unconscious. The unconscious remembers everything. Every thought you deny, every impulse you suppress, every truth you bury. And one day, when you least expect it, the unconscious will erupt through dreams, through illness, through breakdowns, through explosive anger you swore you didn't have. That's why Jung insisted, stop trying to appear good. Because the longer you run from your shadow, the more power it has over you. This next truth will shock you. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your teacher. It's the part of you that carries your repressed creativity, your hidden strength, your untapped potential. Buried in the darkness are not only your flaws, but also your gifts. The anger you deny may hold the key to your boundaries. The envy you suppress may reveal what your soul truly desires. The selfishness you condemn may point to your deepest need for self-love. So the question becomes, will you keep playing the game of appearing good, or will you dare to face the truth of who you are? Let's step back into childhood, because this is where most masks of goodness are first formed. You see, a child is born with raw instincts. They cry when they're hungry, they scream when they're angry, they laugh when they're happy. In those early moments, the child is pure authenticity. But soon, they begin to notice patterns. When they express certain feelings, the parent's face lights up. When they express others, the parent's face darkens. And so the child begins to learn love is not unconditional. Love depends on me being good, but here's the part nobody talks about. What the child learns as good has nothing to do with morality. It has everything to do with survival. If crying too loudly gets them punished, they learn to suppress their sadness. If expressing anger makes their parent withdraw affection, they learn to bury their rage. If being too energetic or curious gets them scolded, they learn to shrink themselves. And what gets rewarded? Smiles, politeness, obedience, silence. The mask of goodness is stitched together, piece by piece, from the child's need to stay safe. Now fast forward to adulthood. The same person who learned to silence their needs as a child becomes the adult who struggles to set boundaries, who avoids conflict, who says yes when they desperately want to say no. They don't even realize that the patterns holding them back were born decades earlier. They think they're being kind, generous, or agreeable. But in reality, they're still that little child trying to survive by appearing good. Wait until you hear this. The mask of goodness isn't harmless. It sabotages relationships in ways most people never recognize. For example, let's say someone always puts their partner's needs first, never expressing their own desires. On the surface, it looks noble, but underneath, resentment builds. Eventually, that resentment leaks out as passive aggression, coldness, or withdrawal. The partner feels confused. You're always so kind. Why do I feel like you're angry with me? That's the shadow speaking. The denied self doesn't disappear. It sabotages from the dark. And here's the next truth that will shock you. The people who appear the nicest are often the ones carrying the deepest shadows. Why? Because they've buried more of themselves in order to maintain their image. They smile while seething. They serve while resenting. They forgive while secretly wishing for revenge. And the longer this goes on, the more explosive the shadow becomes when it finally breaks through. Think of someone you know who always avoids conflict, who seems endlessly patient and agreeable. Now imagine the moment when they finally snap. The eruption is so intense, so disproportionate, that everyone around them is shocked. I never thought they were capable of that. But Jung would say, of course they were capable. They were simply hiding their shadow for too long, and now it has erupted in one violent burst. But here's the part nobody talks about. When you wear the mask of goodness too long, you don't just fool others, you fool yourself. You start to believe your own performance. You convince yourself you're always kind, always selfless, always forgiving, and that belief makes you blind to your own shadow. You project your hidden flaws onto others. You call them selfish, arrogant, or cruel, never realizing that what you despise in them is what you refuse to face in yourself. Let me give you an example. Imagine a man who prides himself on being endlessly generous. He gives his time, his money, his energy to everyone around him. He tells himself he's selfless. But deep down, his generosity isn't pure, it's a bargain. He gives so that others will admire him, so that he can avoid feeling unworthy. But because he denies this truth, he becomes furious when others don't reciprocate. He calls them ungrateful, selfish, or exploitative. In reality, he's projecting his own hidden selfishness onto them. That's the dark psychology Jung warned about. When you refuse to face your shadow, you end up condemning others for carrying it for you. But wait until you hear this. The mask of goodness doesn't just damage relationships with others. It damages your relationship with yourself. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, you betray yourself. Every time you suppress your anger, you swallow poison. Every time you hide your needs, you abandon yourself. Over time, this self-betrayal accumulates into depression, anxiety, and burnout. People wonder why they feel so empty when they've done everything right. The answer is simple. They've lived their life for an image, not for their soul, and here's where Jung's insight becomes crucial. He said the goal of individuation is not to be good, but to be whole. Wholeness means embracing the parts of yourself you've denied, the selfishness, the rage, the envy, the desire. Not to act them out recklessly, but to acknowledge them, integrate them, and channel them consciously. Only then can you live authentically. Think of the young woman we discussed earlier, the one praised for being selfless. When she finally faced her shadow, she realized her constant giving was rooted in fear. She was terrified that if she stopped pleasing others, she'd be abandoned. By facing that truth, she was able to set boundaries for the first time. At first, people were shocked. "You've changed. You're not as nice as you used to be," but in reality, she was simply becoming real. And in time, she found that the relationships which survived her authenticity were the ones worth keeping. This next truth will shock you. Appearing good can actually prevent you from being truly good. Why? Because goodness without authenticity is just performance. It's fragile. It collapses under pressure. But when you integrate your shadow, your goodness becomes rooted in choice, not compulsion. You're kind because you want to be, not because you're afraid not to be. You forgive because it's real, not because you're pressured. You give because it overflows from your soul, not because you're trying to earn approval. That's the difference between persona and authenticity. So let me ask you, how much of your life has been spent wearing the mask of goodness? How many times have you silenced your truth to maintain an image? And what would happen if you stopped? Because here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to appear good, you may lose some people. But the ones who remain will finally see you. Not the mask. Not the performance, you, and that is where real connection begins. Now let's go deeper into one of Jung's most unsettling insights. Society doesn't just encourage you to appear good, it actively punishes you when you stop. This is why the mask of goodness feels so hard to remove. Because it's not just an internal battle, it's a confrontation with the collective. Think about it. When someone dares to say no, when they set boundaries, when they refuse to play the role assigned to them, the world often reacts with outrage. They're called selfish, arrogant, or even dangerous. Why? Because their authenticity disrupts the illusion that everyone else is trying to maintain. But here's the part nobody talks about. The punishment isn't always direct. Often it's subtle, a cold look, silent disapproval, quiet gossip behind your back. These micro-rejections remind you that the price of authenticity is social exile. And for many people, the fear of losing belonging is worse than the pain of losing themselves. Wait until you hear this. Jung said the collective mind is built on conformity. Families, cultures, workplaces, and religious institutions all rely on shared masks to function smoothly. And the good mask is the most powerful of them all. It keeps everyone predictable, polite, and controllable. But the moment someone tears theirs off, it threatens to unravel the illusion for everyone else. And so the collective resists. Here's a story to illustrate this. Imagine a man who has always been the nice guy in his community. He volunteers, helps his neighbors, and never says no. But one day, after years of burnout, he decides to stop overextending himself. He declines an invitation. He sets boundaries with his friends. He takes time for himself. At first, people seem supportive. But soon the whispers begin. He's changed. He's not the same. He used to be so generous. Now he's selfish. In reality, he hasn't become selfish. He's simply stopped sacrificing himself for approval. But the collective can't see the difference. To them, the loss of his mask feels like betrayal, and this is where Jung's dark psychology comes in. When you stop trying to appear good, you expose the shadow of those around you. Your authenticity forces them to confront their own masks. And because they're not ready, they lash out at you instead. But here's the paradox. This very resistance is proof that you're on the right path. The stronger the backlash, the clearer the evidence that you're breaking through illusions. Jung would say this is a necessary test. Can you withstand the discomfort of being misunderstood in order to stay true to yourself? Now let's go deeper. Why does society fear authenticity so much? The answer lies in Jung's concept of the collective shadow. Every culture denies certain traits. Some cultures repress sexuality. Others repress anger. Others repress individuality. These denied traits don't disappear. They sink into the collective unconscious. And whenever someone expresses them openly, society reacts with shock and condemnation. Not because the traits are truly bad, but because they're forbidden. Think of historical examples. Artists, philosophers, and truth-tellers who challenged the moral masks of their time were often shunned, exiled, or even killed. Socrates questioned the illusions of Athens and was sentenced to death. Jesus confronted the hypocrisy of religious authorities and was crucified. Jung himself was ridiculed for suggesting that darkness was part of the human soul. The pattern is clear. When you stop playing the game of appearing good, you threaten the foundation of the collective illusion. And the collective rarely responds kindly, but wait until you hear this. The punishment isn't just external. It also becomes internal. Years of conditioning create an inner voice, the superego, that polices you from within. Even when no one else is watching, you hear the whispers. That was selfish. That was wrong. You should be nicer. You should be better. This internal critic is often harsher than any external authority. It keeps you in line, making sure you never fully embrace your shadow. Here's the part nobody talks about. The superego is not your conscience. It's the echo of society's conditioning. Conscience arises from your soul, from your authentic sense of right and wrong. But the superego is borrowed. It's your parents' voices, your teachers' rules, your culture's expectations. And when you confuse the superego with conscience, you mistake obedience for morality. This is Jung's warning. Stop confusing appearing good with being whole. Because the more you obey the superego, the more you betray your authentic self. Let me give you another example. A woman grows up in a family that values harmony above all else. Conflict is seen as evil. So she learns never to speak up, never to challenge, never to express anger. Her superego tells her she's good when she stays quiet. But years later, she finds herself in toxic relationships where she's mistreated. She stays silent, believing it's good to forgive and endure. But in reality, she's not virtuous. She's trapped. Her goodness is a mask keeping her in chains. Here's the shocking truth. Appearing good often means betraying your truth. And betraying your truth is not goodness, it's self-abandonment. So let me ask you, how many of your good choices were really choices? And how many were survival strategies, ways to avoid rejection, punishment, or shame? Because here's the part nobody talks about. Real morality doesn't come from obedience. It comes from integration. Only when you face your selfishness can you choose generosity authentically. Only when you face your capacity for cruelty can you choose kindness authentically. Only when you face your shadow can you love authentically. Without shadow integration, your goodness is just theater. And this is why Jung's insight was so radical. He didn't want us to be good. He wanted us to be whole. And wholeness requires courage. The courage to disappoint others, the courage to be misunderstood, the courage to be called selfish or bad while you reclaim your authenticity. Here's the part nobody talks about. The moment you stop trying to appear good, you may feel like an outcast. But that outcast is the beginning of individuation. Jung would say you are stepping outside the collective illusion and into your own soul. And yes, it's lonely at first, but that loneliness is sacred. It's the path to becoming who you truly are. So let me leave you with this thought. Maybe the most dangerous thing you can do in this world is not to rebel, not to fight, not to destroy, but simply to take off your mask. Think about this. Have you ever noticed how the person who tries the hardest to look good on the outside is often the one hiding the darkest secrets inside? Jung warned us about this exact paradox. The more you repress your shadow, the more it leaks out in destructive ways. Here's the shocking truth. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It doesn't vanish just because you've covered it up with politeness, virtue, or spiritual language. No, the shadow waits. It waits in silence, gathering energy, and eventually, it bursts out in ways that are often unconscious and damaging. But here's the part nobody talks about. The people most obsessed with appearing good are often the ones most controlled by their hidden darkness. Why? Because repression feeds the shadow. It's like pushing a beach ball underwater. The harder you push, the more violently it resurfaces. Let me give you an example. Think about the overly strict parent who insists on perfect behavior, condemning their children for the smallest mistakes. On the surface, they appear moral, disciplined, and righteous. But behind closed doors, their repressed anger erupts. Maybe they explode in rage. Maybe they drink secretly. Maybe they lash out at their spouse. Their mask of goodness doesn't protect their family. It endangers them. Wait until you hear this. Jung said what you deny in yourself, you project onto others. This means that the person who constantly accuses others of being selfish may actually be denying their own selfishness. The one who criticizes everyone for being immoral may secretly wrestle with their own impulses. The harsher someone judges the world, the more likely they are at war with themselves. Think of history. How many public figures have preached morality only to later be exposed in scandals? Religious leaders, politicians, even self-help gurus, many of them build reputations on appearing good, but their unacknowledged shadow eventually spills out. And when it does, it shocks everyone. But Jung would not be surprised. He would say, of course. The shadow always finds a way. Here's the part nobody talks about. Shadow repression doesn't just hurt others, it hurts you. When you pretend to be good all the time, you cut off your own energy. You lose your vitality. You become flat, mechanical, lifeless. Why? Because your shadow isn't just darkness, it also contains your passion, your creativity, your power. By denying it, you deny yourself. Let me share a metaphor. Imagine your psyche as a house. The rooms you're proud of, kindness, generosity, patience, are on the upper floor where everyone can see. But the basement, the place you've locked away, anger, lust, envy, selfishness, is still part of your house. The more you pretend the basement doesn't exist, the more it starts to stink. You can lock the door, but the smell seeps upward. Guests might not see it directly, but they sense something's off. That's how the shadow works. It leaks through tone, body language, slips of the tongue, even dreams. Wait until you hear this. Jung said, dreams are the theater of the shadow. When your waking mind represses it, your unconscious sneaks it in through dreams. The polite woman who never allows herself to be angry may dream of violent outbursts. The man who pretends to be pure may dream of forbidden desires. The shadow will speak, even if you don't want to hear it. But here's the paradox. Facing your shadow doesn't make you dangerous. Denying it does. A person who acknowledges their dark impulses can choose what to do with them. But a person who denies them is controlled by them unconsciously. They act them out without awareness, often harming others while still insisting they're good. Let me give you another story. A man works at an office where he prides himself on being the nice guy. He never argues, never complains, always says yes. But deep down, he feels resentment. Over time, that resentment grows. One day, it slips out in passive-aggressive comments, sabotage, or sudden explosive anger. His coworkers are shocked. He was such a nice guy. But his shadow had been leaking all along. His goodness was just a mask covering pressure that was bound to erupt. Here's the part nobody talks about. Shadow work isn't about becoming bad. It's about becoming honest. When you admit your envy, you can stop projecting it onto others. When you admit your anger, you can channel it into boundaries instead of explosions. When you admit your selfishness, you can choose generosity consciously instead of using it to manipulate approval. Jung would say, only the person who knows their darkness can truly be trusted. Why? Because they're not hiding from themselves. They don't need to pretend. They have no hidden agenda. Their goodness is authentic because it's not built on denial. Think about that for a moment. Would you rather trust the person who says, I have no dark side, I am always good, or the one who says, I know I'm capable of anger, of envy, of selfishness, but I choose not to let it control me? Jung would say the second person is far more trustworthy, because they've faced their shadow. Here's a shocking truth. The more someone insists they are purely good, the more dangerous they likely are. History is full of people who cloak themselves in the image of goodness to hide atrocities. It's not those who admit their flaws we should fear, it's those who deny them, and this brings us to a painful question. What masks of goodness are you still wearing? Are you pretending to be endlessly forgiving when you're really full of resentment? Are you pretending to be selfless when you're secretly exhausted and bitter? Are you pretending to be nice when what you really want is to scream? Here's the part nobody talks about. Removing the mask of goodness doesn't make you immoral. It makes you human. And in that humanity, you finally have freedom. Freedom to feel, freedom to choose, Freedom to live authentically. So let me leave you with this for now. The shadow you deny is the master you serve. But the shadow you face is the ally you gain. Stop trying to appear good. Start trying to be whole. Ask yourself this. Why does society seem to reward those who pretend to be good, while punishing those who dare to be authentic? Why is it that the person who says what everyone is secretly thinking gets shunned, while the person who puts on a mask of virtue gets applauded? Jung would argue it's because society itself thrives on repression. Here's the shocking truth. Society isn't built on honesty. It's built on masks. Social order depends on people suppressing their impulses, hiding their anger, and playing roles. Without these masks, there would be chaos. But here's the part nobody talks about. This very system, designed to create order, also creates mass hypocrisy. Think about it. From the time you were a child, you were rewarded for being good. You were praised when you smiled, when you shared, when you followed rules. And you were punished when you cried too loudly, when you were selfish, when you expressed anger. Slowly, you learned, parts of me are acceptable, parts of me are not. This is how the collective shadow is formed. But wait until you hear this. Jung said the collective shadow, society's dark side, is just as dangerous as the individual shadow. Why? Because when entire groups deny their darkness, they project it onto outsiders. This is why societies create scapegoats. Instead of admitting, we all have violence in us, people point to an enemy and say, they are violent. We are good. It's projection on a mass scale. Look at history. Time and time again, societies have justified cruelty in the name of goodness. Wars have been fought in the name of morality, purity, or righteousness. Witch hunts, inquisitions, cultural shaming, all of these are collective attempts to hide a society's own shadow by punishing those who reflect it. Jung warned us, the more a culture insists on its own goodness, the darker its hidden shadow becomes. Here's the part nobody talks about. Authenticity threatens this system. When you refuse to wear the mask of goodness, you expose the game. You reveal that people aren't as moral as they claim, that darkness exists everywhere. And because society runs on the illusion of virtue, it punishes those who pull the mask off. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine a workplace where everyone pretends to love the boss. Everyone smiles, nods, and plays along. Then one employee finally says, actually, I don't think this is fair. I don't like how things are run. What happens? That person becomes the problem. They're labeled negative, difficult, ungrateful. Not because they're wrong, but because they broke the unspoken rule, never disrupt the illusion of goodness. Wait until you hear this. Jung believed true freedom comes at a cost. When you stop trying to appear good, you will lose some people. You will upset the system. You will no longer fit into every room, every group, every circle. But here's the paradox. The very rejection you fear is what sets you free. Think of the whistleblower who speaks truth even when it costs them everything. Or the artist who paints what others are afraid to admit. Or the friend who finally says, I can't always be there for you. I need to take care of myself. On the surface, they appear bad, selfish, or troublemakers, but in reality they're authentic. They've stopped sacrificing themselves to maintain an illusion. Here's a metaphor. Imagine society as a theater. Most people are actors on stage, wearing costumes, delivering lines, playing their roles. The audience applauds because everyone is staying in character. But the moment someone drops their mask, the illusion shatters. The audience boos. Why? Because they came for a performance, not the truth. Jung would say, if you dare to live without a mask, be ready for the audience to turn against you. But here's the deeper truth. The people who can endure that rejection are the ones who gain real inner strength. Because they're no longer dependent on external applause. They no longer need society's approval to validate their existence. They've moved beyond appearing good into becoming whole. Let me tell you a story. A woman grew up always being the good daughter. She smiled, obeyed, never caused conflict. But inside, she carried rage at being overlooked, used, silenced. For years, she played her role. Everyone praised her. Then one day she stopped. She said no. She set boundaries. Her family accused her of being selfish. Friends pulled away. At first, she felt devastated. But slowly, she realized, for the first time in her life, she was living for herself, not for their image of her. The rejection hurt, but it also freed her. Here's the part nobody talks about. When you stop trying to appear good, some people will leave. But the ones who stay will finally know the real you. They won't be applauding a performance, they'll be connected to your authenticity. And that kind of connection is deeper, rarer, and more liberating than any applause for your mask. But let's be honest, this path is not easy. Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, a task not for the faint of heart. Why? Because it requires betrayal? Betrayal of the false self you built to please others. Betrayal of the illusion society forced upon you. Betrayal of the comfort of masks. But in that betrayal, you find your soul. Wait until you hear this. Jung warned that most people would rather remain good in the eyes of society than confront their shadow. Why? Because appearing good feels safe. It keeps you accepted. But those who choose safety over authenticity never truly live. They die as actors, never as themselves. So let me ask you directly, are you willing to pay the price of authenticity? Are you willing to lose the comfort of applause in exchange for the truth of your own being? Are you willing to be misunderstood, even rejected, to finally stop living for appearances? Because here's the ultimate paradox Jung left us with. The person who appears good but represses their shadow becomes a slave to it. But the person who faces their shadow, even if the world calls them bad, becomes truly free. And freedom, not goodness, is the real goal of the human soul.